Welcome, Axel, to the Highest Self podcast. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
And the first question I'd love to ask you is what makes you your highest self?
Oh, that's a really powerful question. I think what makes me my highest self is what really has driven me. It is freedom. Like I've always gone after freedom and understanding how to free our minds, how to free our souls, how to free our emotions. And just like that main principle has really driven me to unlocking a lot of secrets in the cosmos. I think that's like the most simplest answer I can give you. Mhm.
I love that. And freedom is such a buzzword and a needed word right now, especially. It's funny because like freedom, like people would be like, our country stands for freedom. And I would like kind of like roll my eyes. And now I'm like, oh, wow, that's actually such an important quality, liberty, freedom, the idea to make the choice. I mean, that's why so many of us, yourself, myself, we all come from immigrant backgrounds of people who've chosen to be here because of the freedom. So it's a powerful time right now where like this concept is for us spiritual people, like becoming more and more important on the forefront.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, and freedom goes so much deeper than just like, like the physical freedoms. Like one of the things I learned early on in my 20s was like, if you're not emotionally free from the past, like are you truly free? Like could you really say that? Because if you're being haunted always by like what you did 10 years ago or like what someone said to you, like you don't truly have freedom. You have like the illusion of freedom. Hmm.
So true. Yeah, that liberation from our limiting beliefs and the stories. And, when we get rid of that,
Hmm.
we can create anything. We can manifest anything that we desire, which we're going to be diving into today.
Yeah.
So, you are an incredible, just like being of light. I don't even know how to describe you. You're a ninth generation shaman and
Mhm.
a PhD in metaphysics. Is that
Yeah,
what it is?
metaphysical sciences. Yep.
Metaphysical sciences and just such a incredible source of knowledge and wisdom, and you've been such a support to me over the past few months of just like so many things. Like Axel has been there supporting, like pulling cards for me, downloading information from the cosmos. So I'm so excited to have him here today. And the way that I found you was on TikTok. So one
Okay.
of your TikTok videos went viral, and it was about what is cultural appropriation. And
Hmm.
this word is such a charged word. Like it's almost like being called a racist, to be called cultural appropriating. It's something that no one ever wants to be called. And it is an important topic because cultural appropriation does happen. And it is a misunderstood and misused word oftentimes because people haven't really dove into what does that actually mean. It's a lot of like, he said, she said, I read this on a post. Therefore, if anyone is doing anything that has to do with any culture besides one that they were born into in this lifetime, then they are cultural appropriating, which is actually hurting many people from these cultures whose practices are people have fear of diving into their practices. And you made an incredible TikTok video, several of them, just sharing how similar so many of these concepts are, such as the chakras and how they exist in Mayan culture in their own different ways. So I would love just to get started on the fieriest topic out there, what is cultural appropriation and what isn't it?
Oh, okay. So cultural appropriation, what it is, like we've all seen some level of cultural appropriation. And like, for instance, like if you go to Coachella, you go to Burning Man and you see that one person who's wearing like the Indian headdress or something like that, that's a great example of like cultural appropriation because you're taking something sacred and you're turning it into a fad, or you're kind of diminishing its importance in our lives, right? So that's what truly cultural appropriation is. But when it comes down to, let's say, somebody who went out and they answered this spiritual call that maybe they had some sort of past life in an Indian culture, and then they went to go pursue that, and then all of a sudden it envelops their life, and they're wearing that headdress because it means something very important to them, and they value the culture. It's part of their soul. It's part of their experience, their dharma, right? um that's where the line kind of draws itself. And oftentimes we just, like, a lot of people who want to point the finger when it comes to like cultural appropriation usually just look at the color of the person, right? Like, you're practicing the chakras but you're white, you're not supposed to be doing that. But even the original like installments, like the original pioneers of the chakras, what did they do? They shared it with everyone, whoever they had access to. They didn't really wait and say, oh, you're not, Indian, you're not this, you're not that, to say that they couldn't learn it. And when you really start thinking about cultural appropriation and spirituality, it really doesn't exist unless you're disrespecting it, because you can hit yourself, you can be in one of the worst places in your life and reach out to the cosmos or to whoever's listening and ask them, hey, I need help, I need some sort of guidance. And any god that maybe comes from the Hindu culture, comes from Greek pantheon, whatever, whoever hears you and has the answer is the one that's going to come through and answer you. And they don't care. They're not like, oh, hey, I'm in the astral realm, you don't belong to this one culture, this one subset, so I'm not going to talk to you. That's totally different. But cultural appropriation, like, and we've also seen it, like when we've seen mascots be of a certain race or anything like that, like that's what truly cultural appropriation is when we forget the importance of culture is not necessarily us practicing a specific cultural practice or belief. It's whether or not we wholeheartedly do it with authenticity, integrity, and with the highest intent in mind for the collective.
I love that so much. Like, yes, when I think of cultural appropriation, I think of the British Museum, which has taken artifacts from all around the world, stolen it from the indigenous cultures, and is using it for a profit. I think of exactly the different sports teams, or even, for example, there's this like yoga studio or movement called Yoga Without the Om. And it's like, we take all of the like Sanskrit stuff out of the yoga, or like Christian yoga, like that I can see as cultural appropriation, because yoga is a Sanskrit cultural Vedic practice. So to take that out, that is cultural appropriation. To take something because it's a fad, to like, buy all the sage and Palo Santo because they're selling it at Forever 21. Like that is cultural appropriation because you're just doing it for the aesthetic or because someone else. However, if you are studying in the lineage, if you truly respect and honor this work, like I have some friends who are white and they are shamans. And a lot of people have a very big problem with that, saying you cannot be a shaman because you're not in this lifetime from an indigenous background. But these are people who've devoted their lives to be initiated and have done vision quests and all sorts of things. But people just look at the color of their skin and say, well, you could never be a shaman, which, if we're going to actually believe in spirituality, past lives, how do you know that that person hasn't been sitting in sadhana or sitting in vision quests or whatever the culture is for many, many lifetimes? It's just in this lifetime, their soul chose to have a different experience for whatever way. I mean, I was speaking about this with Deepak Chopra because, he's someone who obviously is of Indian descent, but his biggest inspiration was Ram Dass. And Ram Dass is the reason why Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, founder of TM, who was Deepak and Sri Sri Ravi Shankar and many other people's teachers, they came to the US because of Ram Dass. However, if Ram Dass was, out here these days on Instagram and TikTok, I bet you people would say, you're cultural appropriating. How dare you? That's not yours. Like, how dare you take that? And imagine if that had stopped him. We wouldn't have such a movement of meditation that we have in the US and around the world if that were a factor. So I think people don't really think about like the long-term effects. Like I have so many people now, they're like, I'm afraid of even learning about Ayurveda because I'm not Indian. And it's like, who is that helping? Is that helping the lineage or is that helping the pharmaceutical industry?
Absolutely. And this is the other thing I point out to people when they pull out this whole cultural appropriation card. Like, we live in a third dimension. The third dimension is material. One of the main laws in the third reality is everything changes. Everything has to blend. So at some point, like we see it with fashion, we see it with food dishes, we see it with ways of thinking where we recycle ideas, we let them change, we let them evolve. We become innovative with new sciences, with the old technology. So like today we're starting to find that a lot of the things that the Egyptians, the Greeks, the yogis are all in alignment with quantum science, and like things that were almost like redefining at a physical level, they had found at a metaphysical level. And like what really comes down to it is like, I like to tell people, if you are really a diehard fan of this cultural appropriation like vibe, right? Stop buying stuff from other countries. Stop eating food that doesn't belong to your specific culture, because everyone loves Mexican food. Well, most everybody loves Mexican food, right? And nobody has a problem going getting a taco or even an Americanized version of a taco, right? And suddenly convenience is what really determines what is cultural appropriation based off of your experience. So you can't just cherry pick what is, you know, cultural appropriation, when all of us are at some level guilty through this dimension of doing so, right? So it's one of those things that when you open yourself up to seeing what's happening, and whether or not, like, if you love tacos and you're eating tacos because like, oh my god, this is the best thing in the planet, are you culturally appropriating it because you do value its significance in reality, right? Like, you're showing it its respect, how it plays out for you. And I tell people, like, if you really want to see how damaging this idea of cultural appropriation is in spirituality, I dare you to live a whole life where you just sustain from your culture everything that you're looking for. That alone is going to change your mind instantaneously. After a while, you'll be like, oh my god, I've been seeing everything wrong. Like, if you want to be a sage of that particular path, do it all the way, and that's going to be your own lesson that you need to learn.
Exactly. And, you know, I think there are great benefits of learning about the spirituality of our unique culture. Like there's such beauty. I'm seeing a resurgence of people learning about the Celtic mysticism or the Welsh or all these different European lineages. And I think a lot of the reason why this started was because in Europe, that ancestry was wiped out. The pagan, the Wiccan, all of that stuff was wiped out by Christianity. So a lot of white European people feel like they don't have a culture, whereas in indigenous cultures, like you're a Mexican lineage mostly, and indigenous, or what is your background specifically?
Mine is Puerto Rican and Spanish, so I'm 50-50.
Okay. So you have that lineage. For me, it's Persian, Indian, North African. So these lineages, because they were in different parts of the world, got to be intact for longer. So we still have more access to these traditional indigenous practices, whereas a lot of people in Europe don't, right? So I think a lot of them, they see like, I feel thirsty for culture. I feel thirsty for tradition. And I'm not seeing that in my lineage, but I'm seeing it in these other cultures. So if that's what ritual and magic looks like, I want in on that. Whereas there has been that in their own lineage, it's just been wiped out. So I think there is such beauty of going back to your ancestral line and learning about that. But at the same time, where do we draw the line of what is from one culture or not? I mean, even like Puerto Rico, for example, like yourself, Spanish, you know, colonists came in and they're indigenous people. So where do you draw the line of what is Puerto Rican and what's not? Where do you draw the line of where was the border of India when that border has been changing even across the 1900s? Where do you draw the line of what's considered of one culture or not, when migration has always happened, movement of ideas has always happened? I mean, even Ayurveda transitioned into Chinese medicine in year 800 AD when Chinese scholars came to India and learned the original 5 elemental principles, which they've transformed, which then Korean medicine and macrobiotics is based on. So where do you say that's cultural appropriation when all of these cultures have always been sharing ideas? And that's how we've learned and grown and developed, right? Not from separationism, but rather from this globalism of learning from each other. And it's almost like people are trying to put this stake in the ground right now of like, well, now these are where the borders are. These are where the cultures are. And like, you can't learn from another one. Whereas that stunts our development and our growth. And it also stunts where we're all heading, which is unity consciousness.
Absolutely. And like, you know, I was telling you just last night about like how King Solomon and Nikola Tesla ended up finding like the same variable in reality, which is like the ethers, and like how the ethers was basically classified by the yogis and the Egyptians in their own ways. So like we continuously recycle information. That's just like what we do. And like as we grow, we have to learn how to integrate not only ourselves, our current, you know, society, but also definitely respect what the ancients have brought into our world, because it's one thing, because sometimes people confuse like cultural appropriation with like completely destroying a culture and its significance. If you're trying to dismantle the cultural significance of like, let's say shamanism or a specific kind of shamanism, then yeah, you're culturally appropriating, like you had said. But if you're also just like diving into it, like just because you feel like there's this draw to it, you can't explain what it is, you have to answer that. Otherwise, you're denying yourself your highest level of existence. Like, and unless you've gone through that personal experience where I'm Puerto Rican Spanish, but at age, I think like 25, 26, I started really just channeling. I used to be a pharaoh in ancient Egypt. And all of a sudden I had this thing where like, no, that can't be true. That can't be true. I tried to go to my friends, get their opinion. They were like, oh, it's probably all in your head. And it wasn't until the moment that I said, this is coming through so hard and I'm understanding things about Egypt that there's no way I should understand this. Let me roll with it. When I did that, I was able to embody another version of myself, like we had said, that allowed me to open up more magic in my reality, that then allowed me to bring in more magic to other people's realities. We have to always come back to this understanding that where does information really come from? It comes from the universe, right? If you want to call that God, if you want to call it source, the all, whatever, it comes from there. People sit down in meditation, they look for answers, and your intuition connects with God and brings you the information, regardless of whatever era you're in, what color of skin you are. That's where we must kind of like understand is like, if you believe in evolution, humans eventually got to a point where they were able to evolve, meditate, hit their internal consciousness and pull out a certain kind of information, right? Which a lot of people who are into like spirituality are learning a lot about the Akashic records. The Akashic records is a huge cosmic library, like, and it doesn't have any rules other than you being conscious of what you're looking for. So how are we using this definition of cultural appropriation and spirituality when even the cosmos doesn't abide by that? You know what I mean? It doesn't really even recognize that as a thing. It's all about us learning how, especially when you study shamanism. Shamanism has over 140 different variations of shamanism. Some of them are really dark, some of them are really light. It depends on your ethics, right? On what it is that you believe is right or wrong for you. And when you start looking at how all these different shamanistic cultures across the world that had no way of connecting with each other got to the same places in the same kind of ways with the same practices, it only leaves you to question, what is reality and are we looking at it correctly? Because a lot of the left brain, the left hemisphere of our brain is identifying separation, identifying like, okay, we can hear all the sounds that we're speaking, but we can't cohesively put all those sounds together to hear the actual phrase, the sentence, the paragraph that we're trying to put out. That's the right side of the brain that does all that logistic like wiring to itself. So right now it's really important for us to understand that we've been living in a very like male-centered, divine masculine reality, and we're diving deep into the opposite contradiction, which is the divine feminine. And we're doing it in such a deep and accelerated way that it almost seems violent at certain points. If you've ever worked with a divine feminine, sometimes she's rebirthing and sometimes she's gonna be like really violent and chaotic and unpredictable. And that's where we're going. But we it's almost as though like we realize that we were living in the divine masculine, or like a really twisted version of the divine masculine. We went all the way over to the divine feminine, saying that this is like the next polar extreme is the answer to solving everything, when really it comes back down to us balancing yin and yang, positive and negative, and like what resonates for us. Because really a lot of the cultural appropriation stuff too that comes out in spirituality is coming from people who don't really dive into this stuff like we do, you know what I mean? And like it's really interesting because it's just a fad. It's like the he said, she said, and that lets us kind of just create a lot of division. It's like misinformation that ultimately happens because maybe somebody has 1 million followers and they felt that was the way to like present that, you know? Yeah.
100%. I definitely do notice that a lot of the loudest voices of it are actually people who are white, who feel like they need to be the voice for people of color and they need to be the protector. And I think that thought in itself is cultural appropriation. That thought that like, because I'm white, I have a privilege that you don't have, and I need to be your voice. I think that constantly reinforces the narrative. And I think that right now, it is important to speak about racism and history and colonialism. Like, trust me, I grew up learning all about that stuff. My dad is hardcore Malcolm X. Like, I grew up hardcore learning about all of it. And to teach and continually reinforce that people of color are fragile and they need you as their voice, and they need you to speak up for them, and they need you to it's like, no, like, let people decide. Like, I know this Native American woman. She has been creating like textiles, handmade textiles, that she creates the fabric all from organic materials. She prints blocks on it, which are from her Native American culture. And she says no one will buy her products anymore because they are afraid that they will cultural appropriate. And now she has to get a 9-to-5 job and is out of business, where she used to fully sell her things on Etsy. So it's just like, again, who are we supporting? Like, the very fact that we are actually hurting the people who have been for generations creating their living off of sharing their culture with the world. And that deserves a monetary exchange. But to be like, no, it's cultural appropriation for me to buy that, so instead I'll shop at Walmart. Instead, I'll shop at the generic place. And it also reinforces white as the norm, because white is the safe thing that everyone can go to, but other cultures are, you don't know if you can go there. So what is that doing? It's further creating a more monochrome Anglo-Saxon environment, where if I, put on, like, I was volunteering in Zimbabwe for 2 months and I bought beautiful African jewelry, but now if I wear that, I guarantee you someone will say, oh, you're cultural appropriating, without like knowing the backstory of it. So again, that's why we need to zoom out and actually look at what are our choices creating in the long run. Are they actually helping these cultures, or are they helping you feel better about helping these cultures?
Absolutely. No, that's a great way to bring it up. Like, the other thing we need to think about is like the spiritual community itself is a culture. So like it itself has its own tone, and it's almost like the real America in a way, because everyone from all over is participating in it, regardless of whether or not like you see yourself as doing so. So when we look at what you said with this one lady that we're only harming like everyone who's in the spiritual community that wants to further the spiritual pathway into this earth. If we're letting this kind of like stop us, we're only self-sabotaging ourselves. We're only like self-destructing ourselves, our own ideas and our own freedoms, because at the end of the day, you're going to get to a point where somebody's going to call you so much and you won't be able to do it, especially with cancel culture, right? Like, cancel culture now is just like, oh, you rubbed somebody the wrong way, so here, we're going to just like completely destroy everything that you are, without looking at maybe the impact that person has made across their lifetime, their career, the other people that they've touched. You know what I mean? Like, now you and I are both people who have worked with others and we've helped them change their lives. You know what I mean? And like, when it comes down to like how the proof is in the medicine itself, right? Like, if you were culturally appropriating, I really truly believe that a shaman that is culturally appropriating and is like essentially a faux shaman cannot deliver the same amount of effects that somebody who's wholeheartedly embodying that. Like, it's just going to show in the work. It's going to show in how they carry themselves and what they say and how they inspire other people. And that's what we should really be using to see who's basically culturally appropriating for the fan base or for like feeling better, versus the people who are actually doing the work that changes the world, like the people who are actually leading. It's an intuitive thing. Like, you can feel it. Like, just like when we know that we've run into somebody that just doesn't resonate with us, we feel that, you know what I mean? And that should be more than enough for us to run with it. The other thing is like, coming back to the whole concept of the modern age, that what we're going through is a neo-spirituality. It's a rebirth of a lot of spiritual concepts. And when we even just look at like neo-spirituality, you could even argue that itself is another form of cultural appropriation. And like, it can get really, it's a slippery slope. It can get really, really crazy after a while, which eventually will stop people from expressing themselves. And like, cultural appropriation, as well as like enforcing your own beliefs onto another person without really knowing who they are, what they're bringing into the world, and how they're doing it. Because we see that with a bunch of things that are going on in the world right now. You know what I mean? I'm not going to really go into that particular area, but yeah.
100%. It's like a modern day witch hunt. Like, I was just in Salem this past week, and I was sharing with you some photos and videos, but it was it was almost incredible to hear the history and how it's repeating, that people who were different, people who people didn't understand, who said something that just wasn't popular at the time, were ostracized, were blamed. Even if the accusation had no merit, the simple fact that someone accused them back then saying, oh, I had a dream that you were a witch, therefore you're a witch. People don't even give a chance for that person to explain themselves. The moment you're accused, you're basically sentenced. And that's what this cancel culture is. The moment someone accuses, they create this movement of all of the people who really are lacking meaning in their lives. So this has become their meaning. They feel like they are creating good in the world. They actually feel like they're protecting and have this like moral compass of this like universal police. And I think that the beginning of the cancel culture movements actually was there for a true reason. Like it was this true reason of people who are sharing hateful or quote unquote untrue things, though who knows really what is truth and what isn't, shouldn't have platforms. And because we don't have a way of moderating that, we are going to be the ones who are going to take control. It just morphed into something that's totally else. That's now, if you aren't repeating the generic norm, the woke culture belief of today, which by the way, is always changing and always contradicting itself. Therefore, you must be canceled because I deem you a witch.
Yeah, totally.
That's basically what's happening.
Yeah. So like actually on TikTok, I remember one person had mentioned in one of my videos that they were like, oh, you know, like your cultural appropriation, you're basically appropriating because you're talking about Egyptian alchemy to a platform where there's a bunch of white people on it and white people don't have third eyes. And I'm like, whoa. I'm like, where did that come from? Like, where did you pull out that information? Aren't we all human? Don't we all have chakras? Don't we all have like this divine understanding? And I remember just responding to this person and just being like, okay, well, obviously this is factually incorrect. And what you're saying with this, because, you know, every culture, especially minorities, especially like your parents and mine, right? Like they had certain interactions with like American culture or white people in general, European people, and they had a certain kind of bias that they developed, and maybe they tried to pass it on to other people. But at the end of the day, when that trickles into your spirituality and you start saying things like, oh yeah, white people don't have like you know, third eyes or whatever, what you've essentially done at that moment without realizing it is you've turned your spiritual practice is essentially racism. It's a low-key racism, and you're not even looking at it that way. And you think you're doing a service for everyone, but ultimately you're not. You're harming yourself as well, because our subconscious can't really tell the difference when we say, like, if I see somebody on the street, right, and I were to come to this conclusion, wow, she's really fat, my subconscious can't tell me whether or not I said that about her, I said that about myself. So in a way, it's going to be like, okay, like everything's a reflection of self. So you're saying it about yourself, even though you're saying it about another person. What are you doing at a subconscious level? At the end of the day, you're only harming yourself, because you're harming your health by creating more separation. And through all these quantum techniques that, you know, like people like Joe Dispenza, Deepak Chopra, what they really bring back is the unity of the self. You have to really sit down and unify yourself to heal yourself, to evolve. It's not about separation anymore. And like a lot of times people are even talking about, like, because on TikTok there was this huge thing about like, you know, the aliens are coming, they're going to be coming through. Why haven't the aliens shown up yet? And it's one of the things is like, do you think an alien culture that's really been able to transcend like their own planetary system and travel the galaxies and all that, do you think they got there through separation? Do you think they got there because, oh, we're green aliens, you're blue aliens? Like, no, only the green aliens get to travel. No, they had to somehow come down to a universal global perspective that we are all one. At the end of the day, we're all humans. Yeah, even white, like let's say white people and black people, right? We're just going to take those two segments. Every black person has their own beautiful trait that they can bring into the world. Same thing with every white person, any person in any culture. We're all different automatically by our personalities and our spirit and our incarnations in general. So this foolish thing of letting skin color really determine who we are and what we're going to do next is not going to allow us to really understand like the next evolutionary trait, not only for consciousness, but for the world, because Gaia really is suffering from all the division. Like we can't even sit down and come down to a conclusion on what's the best method to like protect our own home planet. You know what I mean? And we're sitting, there's so many other things that are happening right now at a bigger scale, and we're still fighting over like what differences lie at surface level. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And divide and conquer is the oldest play in the book. This has been constantly reinforced throughout history when they would go to Africa, Middle East, South America, and take two tribes that have always coexisted and point out their differences. I mean, for example, the Sunni versus the Shia, which are the two sects of Islam, have always coexisted until, you know, British rule and colonizers came and created these arbitrary borders and said, you guys and you guys are now enemies. And since then, the past 80 or so years, so many lives have been lost over this like slight different interpretation of the Quran. People are losing their lives, their children, because of this thing that someone literally pointed out for a reason to cause you to fight. So if we can see this take place all around the world throughout history, how is this happening right now? How have we become so obsessed with labels, so obsessed with pointing at you're this and you're that and you're that and you're that? And it is important to notice our differences, to celebrate our differences. We're not here to be one homogeneous alien race quite yet.
Yeah.
However, if all we do is point out our differences, we don't notice our similarities. And there, you know, I mean, 99% of our genes are like the same as a monkey, let alone each other's, us humans, right? But all we're doing is pointing out our differences. So who is benefiting from this? We need to ask that question.
Yeah, and one of the things that people usually forget is like the cradle of all civilization is Africa. So, I mean, like we all came from this one place. We all decided to evolve at some level by traveling or whatever. And like we forget what our true roots are, which essentially is like we're all the same in a very different way. And we have to really sit down and really think about what the implications of that are, because I mean, essentially manifestation is perception, right? So like what we perceive to be true is what's going to give us more of what we're looking for in this reality. And a lot of times people forget that the universe gives you exactly what you want. So like if you're constantly focusing on the separation, on the fear, on gatekeeping other people, that's going to come back around to you at one point or another when you feel like it's time for you to evolve or hit the next level. And then you're not going to let yourself do that because you've manifested a perception that now limits you. It's really important to be able to say, okay, I can spot out what true cultural appropriation is versus like the you know, like the assumption of someone else. And I really do believe that is partially the cause of it is social media, because social media, especially like with TikTok and stuff and reels, we're so quick on just making a whole decision on a piece of information or a person off of a 15-30 second clip. So now all of society is pretty much being trained to make snap judgments, which is okay if you're using your intuition. If you can tap into your intuition to make that snap judgment that then aligns you with a divine path. But we haven't even learned how to do that yet. And it's almost as though like the technology we've created is now self-sabotaging our own growth in a way if we don't recognize that that's what it's going to end up doing to us if we don't change. So yeah.
And I think even beyond that 15-second clip, it's the comments under it. You know, like how many of us, we look at the video and before the video is even done, we're going through the comments. We want to know, what do other people think about this? Because that informs our decision. And so many people right now are unable to make decisions for themselves. They're like, how do I feel about this? Let me see what people are writing in the comments. Let me see what this influencer said. Let me see what the other people are saying, because they must be right. So I should just follow along with them. That I really think what social media has created is for so many people an inability to make their own decisions, because you don't want to be the one who's canceled. You don't want to be the one who's burnt at the stake. So you're just looking at where's the group think? Where's the group think? Okay, I'm going to fit in there because I don't want to be the one that they're going to call out. And what it's creating is just the loudest voice wins, because the loudest voice becomes the scariest voice, and it becomes everyone wants to side with that person. So if one person is like, I hate Axel because he's a false shaman and he's a cultural appropriator of Egyptian culture and we hate him, created a bunch of videos about you, that could create an entire movement, which, luckily you're a very strong and sovereign person, and I know you'd fight back. But for a lot of people, that leads to their demise. And it's very, very dangerous because it's simply based off of one person's accusation, and it's not based on the truth. And so many people right now are just becoming carbon copies of each other because they're afraid of being that one black sheep.
Yeah, for sure, totally. And when it comes down to like those, you read a comment, right? Like coming back to that, when like there's this great technique when you get angry at somebody or like they really piss you off, instead of reacting in that moment and be like, you know what, this and this and this, they tell you, okay, take a second, take at least 24 hours, meditate on it, and then come back to it. If you really do still feel that way, then vocalize your opinion with that person. And we don't even do that anymore, because maybe you should digest a piece of information, and over the course of the next couple of days you might meditate with it subconsciously and be like, you know what, I kind of do agree with this, or I don't agree with that, instead of just looking at the comments and seeing like, oh, all these people hate this person, I'm gonna just automatically be impulsed again by the 15-30 second rule, and I'm just gonna throw in some hate. And then you don't really think about, like, what are you doing? Like, everything again is a vibration of manifestation. If you're sending hate to another person, you're eventually going to manifest that hate for yourself, like no matter which way you want to paint it. And it comes back to like, you're causing harm to other people. I'm not saying like, every person is void of, not getting that like kind of attention, because some people have two-face, right? They come on social media, they paint something that they aren't, and then those people end up finding out that those are fake people, and then the cancel culture kicks in, right? That's a different story than allowing ourselves to kind of like sit down, make a conscious decision after we've meditated on it, because that's really what it comes down to. Like, there's every guru in existence has given a student a piece of information, and that student may not get it right off the bat. Like, I've been there millions of times, and I've had to sit with something maybe for a week, a year, freaking 5 years, to then be like, oh, like I get where my guru is coming from, even though it hit me hard at the time of absorbing it, because I wasn't ready to absorb it at that moment, right? It's having this level of patience. And I think, like, especially with like the era of being able to order something online and have it come over immediately, people are really losing this ability of being patient, which eventually develops vulnerability for yourself. Because when you're patient and you can't make a snap judgment, you become vulnerable with what's happening in the moment, and you can become vulnerable with yourself, which then lets you find clarity. Like, the truest answer to the cosmos doesn't lie really with the influencer or whatever it is that you're using to digest the information. Is how you take the information that's coming through and processing it for your own personal enlightenment, for your own life, for your own truth. At the end of the day, we always have to come back to self-knowledge. What is everything that you're absorbing coming back and telling you about yourself and what's right for you and your reality? Because when you realize that, you'll see past like a lot of the division that's happening right now in terms of social media and other areas of life.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important for us to realize it's a human on the other side, and you do not know that person. Like, we are so quick to judge based off of, even if I've been following this person for a year, you don't know them. Do you post everything about your life on social media? Absolutely not. I would say 99% of my life is not on social media. I pick very specific things that are related to my dharma that I'm sharing with the world on social media. But like, Axel, like, I'm not sharing everything. I'm texting it to you. I'm not sharing it, but that's the beauty of being a human, like, to have that personal life, to have that privacy, to have different sides of yourself. But we are so quick right now to assume that we know someone simply because we've been following them. And it's this righteousness and also narcissism that's happening of, I followed you. I listened to you. Therefore I put you on a pedestal, and you are not matching everything that I assumed for you. The vision I created for you in my mind, you are not living up to that anymore. So now I will destroy you, because this means that everything I've created in my mind is false, and I can't let that happen. So you are the reason for all of my problems. And we see this happen again, the pedestal and the throwdown, the pedestal and the throwdown. So realize that every single person on the internet fucking shits. Every single person on the internet has some skeletons in their closet, has some things they don't want out there, has stories and traumas and fears and problems with their families and like all of these things that you just don't see. And don't be so quick to judge this. It's not even 3D, it's 2D. You're not even
Yeah.
seeing that person. It's a 2D experience that we are all of a sudden making this like universal judgment on. And really it's just showing how far away we are from human connection right now.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And that's like the most important thing right now is like one of the things that we really need to start tapping into is like this love concept, right? And like I tread on that very lightly because sometimes people are like, oh yeah, love and light, let people just like walk all over me, do whatever, right? But really it's just having compassion, like being able to understand that like everyone's going through their own life journey. Everyone's still figuring it out. Shoot, I've been doing shamanism my whole entire life and I'm still not even mastered at it. You know what I mean? People, I'm a master to other people's realities, but even to myself, I'm still like, whoa, I still don't understand anything, right? So like when we can give ourselves that permission to be like, okay, we're constantly exploring what reality is. And at any given moment, reality can change because that's science, right? We have to be willing to say that like everything we used to know at one point isn't anymore or used to work for us to a certain degree, right? We used to have like old school TVs or a VHS player that worked for us for a certain amount of time. And now we switch over to DVDs and now we're not even using DVDs anymore unless you really have to. So you have to allow yourself to be very fluid because that's what consciousness is. That's what infinity is. Your consciousness is infinite and you have to allow yourself not to go not only with the flow of what society is going with, and that's not saying that society is always wrong, but sometimes society is misguided and it's those very individual few like Buddha, Gandhi, like ourselves that are bringing this attention to other people. That's one of those things that you need to allow yourself to really embody is like sometimes it's not unhealthy to look in the opposite direction than what everybody else is looking in. Mhm.
Yeah. And I think it's really like the way that we were brought up of like, listen to the teacher, listen to the
Mhm.
parent, listen to the authority. Someone else knows more than you do. So you sit down, shut up, be obedient and listen to what they have to say. And a lot of people are looking for parent figures and they're finding them on the internet. And
Mhm.
that's what's happening right now of, I don't know you, but now you are my parent figure and I am waiting for your validation. I'm waiting to form my opinions based off of what you say. And then if I don't like where you're at now, if I disagree with you on this one subject matter, oh shit, now I got to find a new parent figure in my life. And I don't
Mhm.
want to do that. And it's so harmful because it's like, you don't know anyone's total background at all. And then the fact that we're also always changing, it's an interesting concept to observe from the outside because in so many ways we're growing spiritually and in so many ways we're like regressing emotionally and it's like
Mhm.
simultaneously happening right now.
Yeah. So 2020 was all about our shadow coming out to the forefront. And we saw that. Like everybody was like, oh my God, I'm stuck at home. I have to do like self-reflection, all this other stuff. 2021 is all about our inner child now. It's about us really stepping in and being like, okay, what have I been believing since I was a kid? Like, how am I going to let that orchestrate the next events in my life? Because that, like, one of the things that I've learned through like helping other people heal their inner child and their shadow work and stuff is like we already knew who we were, where we were going, what we wanted to be when we were kids. Like we didn't have the full picture of it, but I can guarantee you, like when I was a kid, one of the things I used to tell people is like, I want to be a doctor or I want to be a teacher. Surprise, I'm both. You know what I mean? Like, and it comes down to like this thing. Like I never knew I'd be a shaman doing that kind of work, but it eventually manifested. And so many other people have a very similar story, and that's what's coming up this year specifically. Is like, how do we reparent our inner child to not only have a parental guidance, but also to make us feel like we are empowered in our own sovereignty in the sense of like, our creativity, our imagination. Because right now there's a huge war on consciousness. It's like everyone's fighting for your attention, whether it's social media or the next person that wants to dictate which way the world is going to be ran in. There's this attention grabbing sequence that's going on, and you have to come back and be like, okay, if I were raising a child today, which you are essentially always connected to your inner child, what would you want your inner child to really absorb of today's society? Like you have to think for yourself. You can't take everything from social media at face value. And like a lot of times we forget about that. We forget about like, what would we tell our kids today based off of what's going on in our society? And how can we translate that directly to the shadow, into our inner child, so that we can thrive and we can grow past the limitations that are being experienced right now? Because there's so much of this like internal confusion when it comes to even creativity and like what is acceptable. And that's one of the things that you really have to think about, is like cultural appropriation eventually is going to seep into the arts if you're not careful, or it's going to seep into like philosophy, to the point where that creates a very regimen kind of form of thinking, where like if you think outside of the box, it's going to be completely 100% frowned upon, and it's going to be used against you. You're going to be ostracized, and nobody wants to live in a reality where they cannot express their creativity, that they cannot, you know, fully fulfill themselves in whatever direction they want. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those things that it's a very tricky time today. It's a tricky time to educate people and also like grow as an individual, because a lot of it is coming back to you. And that's like the whole entire spiritual process, right? But more than ever now, it's coming down to like your own discernment on what works with your own ethics for your reality.
I love that so much. And yeah, and like what even is creativity? Like, where do ideas come from? Like, did they actually come from only that culture, or are they universal planes of information that will land in the crown chakras of whoever are a fit? And I remember
Yeah.
in one of your videos, you shared how just the chakra system, for example, there are many different similar versions of it all around the world. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. Um, so the Egyptians had their own way of understanding the chakras. They mostly associated each chakra to a specific animal and its properties for the animal. And they thought of the Nile River as the same concept of the Kundalini that the Hindu culture, the yogic culture has, which then if you compare like yogic culture and then Egyptian culture, they both had tantra in it in their own ways. Like the Egyptians used to tell people all the time that reality is essentially like what you're doing is you're masturbating with your own spirit when you realize how interconnected everything is. The yogic alchemy teaches you that you are the universe, and tantra really teaches you one thing, which is like you're always having an orgasm right now. The only thing that separates you from the constant existence of having an orgasm is your ego, because you have to show up to work, you have to do this, you have to do that. But if you took a second to just disconnect from your ego, you could have an orgasmic experience right now without even having sex or doing anything like that, because that's a constant universal law. The so you know, we have the traditional chakras, we have the ancient Egyptians, the Greeks and the Romans. They associated the chakras to planetary bodies, which was like Jupiter, Venus. And then all these sciences, like when you think about, okay, what is the vibration of the sacral chakra in yogic alchemy? Well, it's tied to your gut health, your emotional system, how you accept things, like your abundance center. And then you think about, okay, in Greek alchemy, Venus is associated to the sacral chakra. Venus is associated to your emotions. It's associated to love. It's associated to the acceptance of almost like being revered and fame. And those two concepts are very much in alignment with each other, where you start seeing like, whoa, they all had a different way of understanding the same thing. The Mayans had power bars. They didn't consider them to be chakras. They had 5 power bars. Each one of the power bars associated to a specific aspect of your consciousness, of your reality. So like when it comes to like energy work, energy is reality. Energy is what composes absolutely everything. Your consciousness is energy. So if that's the case, who's to say that an energy cannot just be anywhere, anytime, right? Like we have Wi-Fi, where there's certain cities that have Wi-Fi all over the city, and you can get a signal anywhere, right? You got to think of that Wi-Fi signal as a cosmic law. The universe is like the cosmic internet of all sorts. Once you learn how to tap into the cosmic internet, you can pull out any form of information you wanted to, and you could use that. And you're going to find that like there's a lot of similarities, because everything is repeating itself. Everything is essentially like interconnected. And like, I mean, if you've never done psychedelics, that's one of the first things like an ayahuasca experience is going to teach you, is the interconnectedness of absolutely everything in reality.
I love that so much. I remember I was in Las Vegas on like outside of Vegas in the Nevada mountains on a medicine journey. And I looked out into the mountains and I saw what we would consider like Native American symbols. I saw them in the mountains. And that is when I realized they didn't just come up with these symbols out of nowhere. It's in the nature. They looked at nature and they sought to be there. And I remember having a similar experience just looking in this palm tree and seeing the red, yellow, and green. And I was like, this is where the Rastafarian colors come from. So like all of these things that we associate with different cultures actually come deeper than that. They come from what is existing in the planet in that place, which they probably even without medicine at that point just had the level of consciousness to see it. So they were creating art, creating fabric and textures and sacred geometry based off of what is already there. If anyone takes plant medicine, sacred geometry is one of the first things you're going to see. That doesn't just exist in yogic culture. That is in the ground. That is in the leaves. That is what everything in the universe is made up of. So it's actually a very naive perspective to assume that one culture just came up with it one day and actually realize that it's there. We just aren't seeing it.
Yeah, well, one of the things too, which is really interesting, we kind of like talked about this a little bit, but when it comes to cultures have been trading information and getting with each other for forever. Like the Indian culture and the Egyptian cultures, they were really well known for trading information with each other back and forth. So who's to say who came up with it first? Maybe they both came up with a different style of it, and they were like, oh, you're missing this one piece to your formula. Here, let's trade, right? Because that's essentially what it is. We're always trying to like gap in between like these different philosophies, especially like if you study religion, all religions come back down to like one major truth, which is connecting with source and embodying your self-knowledge to some degree. Everyone gives it a different kind of spin, but when you start reading them and you start even looking at the similarities of how to get there, you start saying, oh wow, like we just kind of just like slightly modified it for specific reasons, maybe for the people to understand. When you start understanding culture as well, you start understanding that like the ancient Egyptian culture isn't here anymore, right? So it's there, but it's not there. It's not the way that we relied on it based off of what we know now. So the Egyptians themselves, back in the day, the old kingdom, they had a totally different vision on the universe. They operated on a totally different set of laws that today, even if we translate their magic into English, German, whatever, some of it's going to get lost because we don't have the same perception of reality that they did. So in a way, even just like trying to say that you're recycling or you're reviving certain kinds of information could be even taken as a way of like cultural appropriation, because you're slightly changing it based off of the modern culture that's trying to interpret it or unlock its information.
Yeah, I think that's an important point to bring up, that culture doesn't even exist in the same way today that it did in that time. Like the ancient Egyptian mythology that you and many people are drawn to. You go to Egypt, you're not allowed to meditate in the pyramids. You are not allowed to gather in circle. You are not allowed to be an Om, because now it's an Islamic government and it's practicing Sharia law, and they don't want you to have that type of connection because that's not what the religion now is. So we have to also understand, like, I mean, if you want to talk about cultural appropriation, basically every single world religion that has invaded other cultures and brought their religion, like that right there is cultural appropriation. But people, they don't really see it quite like that. They think it's just people on TikTok doing it. And I'm like, oh no, honey, there's a lot bigger fish to fry out there.
To fry, yeah, definitely. And it's one of those things where, it's good that people are being conscious of like, this is a thing that we should be keeping an eye on, but everything with moderation. Like, you're not going to eat a ton of sugar because you're eventually going to develop some sort of health condition. You're not going to go all the way to the extreme of any one idea. Otherwise, it's going to taint some other aspect of your reality. And I think that's the most important thing to really grab from it.
Yes. And I think just having conversations like this, and that's why I love the podcast, because we can dive deeper into it and have the context and have all of the different perspectives that go around it. Whereas if I made an Instagram post, just like, what is cultural appropriation? Like, here's what I think with my like 120 character limit that you have on Instagram. And all of these people who don't know you, they don't even follow you, they have no awareness of who you are, there's no context there, it turns into a fight that I've honestly never even heard anyone have this conversation before, because most people are too afraid to even touch it. And people might be listening right now and be like, hey, I agree with what you said here, I don't agree with what you say here, and that's beautiful. Like that is the point. Like the point is to talk about these things and to understand different perspectives, to formulate our own and allow our opinions to change with more information too.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just like what I really like about, I don't know, this whole cultural appropriation thing is like it is serving its purpose. It's forcing people to really step into like this higher sense of awareness, but we also have to be able to see how that eventually is going to affect like just like the future generations. Because again, like today a lot of us are living our lives where, you know, some of us are conscious of Mother Earth and what we're contributing in terms of like her longevity, but then we don't think about like how certain things that we're putting into play right now, which we're all victims of certain things. Well, you know, it's quote unquote victims. We're all product of what our parents believed to be the foundations of reality, and we've progressively changed those things to become a better society. We still have our flaws, but we also have to recognize, okay, what was one of the things that they were doing in the past? They were segregating in the past, right? And we found that to be a problem. So now we're repeating this like segregation in a way without realizing that history repeats itself, right? And we gave it a totally different skin. You know, we changed the outside of the framework of the program, and that's it. That's all we did. So we need to make sure that we, as a conscious collective, we're not creating more of the same for the future. And now is the time for us to really dismantle a lot of these things by being educated, taking the time not only to, you know, talk to people of the culture. Like I have tons of students that are from India, and sometimes I don't understand a specific concept, and I'll message them and I'll be like, hey, like, what does this word mean? How does this play in your life? How, like all this other stuff. Having the ability to communicate in today's modern world with people who actually come from those cultures and like, you know, are living that life is a tool. And in a way, it's like I've realized that because of how social media is designed, a lot of people have forgotten how to use Google. I don't know if you've like noticed that yourself, but yeah, it's kind of one of those really crazy things. So like, yeah, I'm very hopeful for the planet as long as people are still willing to ask the questions. The moment we stop even debating the question, that's when we've really stepped into some like really big stuff, some really big issues.
Yes. And that's why I think in-person gathering and community is so needed. So we can be in a living experience with different people, not just seeing them on social media and making these assumptions based off of what their posts are, but to actually be living in community and to have like deeper connections that we can see someone for the full humanness of who they are, that we feel safe to ask those questions. We feel safe to be like, hey, I'm actually really curious about this thing of your culture. Like, what do you think about this? Whereas right now, I think people are afraid to ask the question because there's no rapport, there's no relationship that's been being built. So again, we need to live on the land in community. Like that is happening. And also to do the healing within ourselves. So one thing I really want to chat with you about today is quantum heart healing. I know this is something that you teach and you guide, and you're going to be guiding a full ritual and activation of in Rose Gold Goddesses next month, which we are so excited about. So can you share what quantum heart healing is all about?
Yeah, so the quantum heart healing technique basically comes from Antohai and comparing. So Antohai is this energy signature that I channeled in 2015. I had this really bad accident. It left me completely bedridden. I couldn't feed myself, go to the bathroom. I couldn't do anything. I had other people taking care of me at the time. I got to this point where I was just like, yo, I was bedridden for like a year and a half. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. If this is what I'm resigning myself to in the material universe, I'm totally fine dying. Like I'm out, take me out of here. And I remember I got to this point where, you know, it's the same cliche story that everyone tells you about. Like I was having a near-death experience looking back on it now, and I saw the light and I was going towards the light and I'm like, oh, this is it. And then all of a sudden I heard this voice that was like, but there might be an answer somewhere else. And I said, fine. if the answer doesn't exist in the material universe, I'll go wherever I need to go get it. Like, just take me, and I'm willing to learn. So then I remember just kind of like turning away from that light, and then I took off and into the cosmos. For like the next 6 months, I spent some time like in other universes, like literally other planets, other dimensions, talking to the ascended masters, aliens of all sorts, almost like learning the back print of reality that we are never taught, right? And up until this point, like I had tried everything. Like I come from a shamanistic culture. I had learned like 16 different styles of Reiki before I had my accident. You know, I had been healing people, but none of it helped me. I didn't know how to get out of it. So I, when I said finally I'll go discover this wherever I need to go, I learned Antohai, which is it's an ascended, oops, it's a ascended language, and basically the ascended language itself.
One second. It froze for a second. Can you just go back to like 3 seconds ago?
Yeah.
I'm gonna edit it. Yeah.
So Antohai is basically hold on, let me start over. Antohai is basically an ascended language, and what it does is it teaches you the fundamental laws of reality and how to hack reality by understanding and integrating these laws into your life. So one of the main fundamental laws that you first learn when you take Antohai is how to bend and control time to your will. Time is a thought in our mind. Like if you took away humans and their processing of time, what is left over? There's only just cycles. There's only experience. There's only life. There's no time. There's no clock. So in a way, when we start understanding like these fundamental laws and we don't let time control us, you'll end up learning, okay, well, you know, you can slow down time, you can speed up time, you can use the plasticity of time to rewrite a memory, this is all found in quantum science. So one of the things that brought the quantum heart technique into light was after studying Antohai for like, 4 or 5 years and practicing it on other people all over the world, I came to this conclusion that your heart chakra, because each one of your chakras is a dimensional doorway into another dimension. Your heart chakra has been associated to the past, love, relationships. It's also tied to the ethers. King Solomon wrote about the ethers, basically stating that it's a place where you can access all magic at once and pull it into the physical universe. Nikola Tesla eventually wrote about the same concept like many, many, many hundreds of years later. And he ended up saying that the ethers is this fabric of reality that connects everything that is available to us in reality. And then we can see how like that same concept goes into like today's modern understanding in quantum science, is heart coherence. Like if you have a really strong heart chakra, then you can expand your influence across the world. You can literally influence the world with your heart chakra based off of your emotions. The planet Earth has a heart chakra. So the quantum heart technique comes back down to us tapping into like the most magnetic center in our reality, and which is automatically going to connect us to the ethers, which is going to connect us to everybody, which is just going to make us get deeper into Mother Earth. And when you can tap into that center, you can let go of the past. You can better your relationships. You can not only do it with other people and other events that have taken place, but you can do it with yourself. That's the most important thing about it all, is like, if you don't have that heart coherence with yourself, where you're saying you love yourself, that you are interconnected with everyone, that sometimes it's hard to see that, but you're always going to hold that at the deeper centers of yourself, you're always going to find some sort of struggle with reality. You're always going to find something that's keeping you away from fulfilling your soul purpose. A lot of what connects us to our soul purpose is being able to tap into the unlimited power of our emotions and our desires, and then pursuing them so that we can free ourselves. So the quantum heart technique is designed to not only help people get a clearer understanding as to what are the most important things that matter to them. Because when we go to the quantum heart technique, one of the things that I really teach you is that nothing really matters right now than the now moment, right? Because you could have amassed $1 million over the last couple of years. Tomorrow you die, you can't take that with you. So what's the most important currency is your self-understanding and how you are impacting the world with every small thought, every small emotion that you're delivering, consciously or unconsciously, right? And the only way you can really tap into that is by really connecting to that heart chakra, which then allows you to not only become better at manifesting, but it also allows you to really understand that like you are so much more powerful than you've ever given yourself credit. You know what I mean? Because when you start really tapping into your heart chakra and you start understanding the power, your DNA will change. Your DNA will literally rewire itself. And the heart chakra is associated with gratitude. The University of Berkeley has found that when you practice gratitude, you can cancel out depression and anxiety because it rewires neurons in your brain. And that all comes back to magnetizing more experiences that make you feel like you are having the best life ever. So a lot of the energy too that comes from the quantum heart space is associated to life. One of the other classes that I teach is quantum Reiki, which is what really kind of like broke the waters for me in terms of like my spiritual path. And the heart chakra is associated to like pure life energy. A lot of times people are like, oh yeah, Reiki, you know, the crown chakra, which yeah, the crown chakra does bring in life energy, but what really harnesses the balance of the heart of the life energy is the heart chakra itself, because it balances the lower aspects of your conditions and the higher aspects of your conditions to have the most fulfilled life. So one of the things that I really like to point out there is like, I help you tap into like 9 critical centers. Like, what does money actually mean to you? Like, what is the monetary value for you? What is why is it that you've been holding on to this one experience for such a long time? And the quantum heart technique, I've used it on a lot of autoimmune disorders. So people, women with fibromyalgia, people with HIV, Parkinson's disease. And one of the things that we found doing the research that I do here at Antahai is like, when you do the quantum heart technique and you get a person who has fibromyalgia to really feel gratitude, one of the first things that ends up happening is shadow confrontation. You end up hitting some sort of wall that's trying to stop you from experiencing that vibration because it's tied to something else. If you push right past that, you end up getting to a memory that programmed you to feel like you shouldn't be feeling gratitude. And the moment that you get to that memory and you decide to just connect heart to heart with like 3-year-old version of you that absorbs some sort of twisted message that you're not worthy, and you decide to give that version of yourself love, you're going to see like your health conditions are going to automatically change because you're no longer holding on to that trauma. That's no longer something that's stuck in the past that's defining your future, right? You're living now in this moment, recognizing that the power has always been in front of you. You just got caught up in a different illusion that took away your power from your presence, right? So it's one of those things that I really love to bring to other people because it has so many different effects that can go into it other than just health. You know, it can be one of those great manifestation techniques. I have students that just do the quantum heart technique all the time. And a lot of it compares research that, you know, like Joe Dispenza, Greg Braden, even this one YouTuber that I used to follow a while ago, Anae Brown, like they've all kind of like contributed to it. And one of my specialties, my divine abilities, is being able to see, you know, like the flaws in people's formulas and like, or not necessarily flaws, but like where they acquired a bunch of information, but they haven't touched this just yet. And I can kind of piece things together. So that's really what it brings in. It brings in all this different research from quantum science and like, you know, ancient shamanism techniques to help you unlock how your body's responding to time, how your soul is feeling fulfilled, how you're connecting to Mother Earth, how your spirit embodies itself through your aura. Because when you're living from a really heart-centered space, you end up emitting that in your aura, and it's undeniable. Like if you've ever heard of a guru, like some people say like, all I did was sit in the presence of this one guru and it changed my life. It's because they're living from such a high-centered, heart-centered space that all it could emit from them was the purity of their soul. And that's why when you were in front of that, it reminded you of the purity of your soul. So that's really what this comes down to. And it's a very simple technique. It's not too complicated. It does have like, you know, it goes in depth after a while when you get really advanced in it, but it's one of those things that you learn it and you just have to carry it. You just have to remember how to do it on a daily basis. And that's it.
Yay. Well, we're so excited to have this experience in Rose Gold Goddesses with you. And, you know, I'm always like focused on like, I'd say a chakra every 2 years or so. That's like my main one. And it was sacral for the past 2 years. And recently it's shifted into heart. And just like meditating every single day and like feeling my heart, just placing my hands on my heart, breathing into my heart, feeling my heart beating, feeling the magnetism that's there. Like it's electric, the power that the heart has. And when you just spend a couple minutes of your day just focusing on your heart energy, you don't even need to think anything, just to really feel into your heart or bring upon a emotion that you want to experience in your heart there. It is so powerful. And you feel the difference in someone who's connected to their heart versus someone who's not. Like someone
Oh
who's
yeah.
just speaking from the analytical mind, or even from a lot of third eye information, when the heart is not turned on, it's like missing that embodiment. It's missing that feminine. It's missing that like passion and feeling, which is
Mhm.
really what most of communication is. It's not the words, it's the feeling and it's the expression of it. So I feel like the heart right now is such an important area to focus on. And also on the topic of your dharma and your soul's purpose, you'll never be able to live your purpose if the heart is not activated, because you won't have the passion to be able to get through all of the roadblocks that will naturally arise. It's really just a level of like, how open is your heart? And even in situations that may want to close your heart, can you keep it open? So if someone maybe feels disconnected from their heart, they've dealt with a lot of heartbreak, people betraying them, what advice do you have for them to open their hearts?
Oh, wow. Well, that one, if someone's betrayed you, you always have to recognize that a person that betrays you is only working off of the extent of consciousness that they have. Sometimes people betray you today, and 5 years from now or a couple months from now, they realize that they were in the wrong because they have a different level of consciousness based off of what they did to you originally. And when you've been betrayed, you have to also understand that you're not perfect. Like you've done the same thing to someone else. No matter how good of a person you are, you might have betrayed them unconsciously and you might have never heard of it, right? Like you were supposed to be somewhere, you couldn't make it. That person felt betrayed. They stopped talking to you. You just chalk it up as like, oh, just like we just fell out of resonance. But maybe you left that inside of them as well. So when you recognize that you're not omitted from causing some of these experiences, and then you did some of these things as well from your level of consciousness at that time, you've grown, you've changed. And like one of the things that a friend of mine had brought up the other day to me was, people don't change. And I said, that's not true. That's absolutely not true. Like, are you the same person you were like 10 years ago? No, obviously not, but that's not what I mean. No, that's exactly what you mean. Like, you're not the same person. So you have to be able to recognize that for other people. And the when people have betrayed you, it comes down to also like how willing were you to be a participant of that, right? Because like nobody can walk all over you unless you choose to participate in that vibration. A lot of the times that comes down to like lack of self-love, right? And like I was married once to a narcissist and then I got divorced, and the only reason why I stayed in that relationship is because I didn't have self-value for myself, right? I didn't say like I deserve more than this until the very last moment where I had to walk away from it and my life exploded in front of me. And it's today I can't even look back and say it's his fault. You know what I mean? It was my fault because I had all the information coming to me. I had the intuition. My friends were telling me I could have made a decision, but I didn't. So at the end of the day, sure, it ended up in a really crappy situation. I learned from it. I grew from it. I couldn't be who I am today without it. And for that simple fact of like, if you have grown in such a way that today you're like, man, I'd never want to be that old version of myself. All you can do is look back on those moments that have shaped you, no matter how difficult they are, and be grateful for them, because that was part of your dharma. That was part of your soul purpose. That's what brought you here. And sure, sometimes we can evade them because, if we do truly listen to our intuition at that moment, we can get past it and avoid a bullet, but it's not always going to be that way. And that's why we come here. We come here to experience lessons. We come here to experience change, and we come here to just become a better version of ourselves, regardless if we have to experience the pain to get
I
there.
love that so much. And yeah, it is so important to recognize our own responsibility in everything that we're creating, which is the sexiest topic, but it's interesting
Yeah.
because like we're in this time right now that I feel like people are almost afraid of saying that word responsibility. They're like, well, that's
Hmm.
victim blaming. And, no one deserved that, which is true. No one deserved their trauma. But
Hmm.
now we are
Nobody.
responsible for how we're going to, live the rest of our lives. That's where our
Hmm.
responsibility lies, rather than repeating the narrative of, well, this happened to me and this is why I'm like this, and creating a
Hmm.
label for ourselves of, well, now I'm depressed, I'm anxious. And like, no, that's not who you are. That's what you're feeling at this moment, but it's not who you are. And we're so quick to, yeah, label ourselves based off of just something that happened to us that doesn't need to forever define us.
Yeah, actually, I would love to share this one like little excerpt, I guess, of my life. Before I met you, I had a dharmic experience that put me in that place that we're talking about. And I remember I had gone to Sedona, Arizona. I had been looking to talk to my mom through this one shaman that's there because my mom's passed away. And I was like, you know what, I really got to talk to her. I had waited for this shaman on the last day of my trip to Arizona, and he wasn't available. So I went home kind of like, oh man, like super bummed. I ended up having a session with someone, and she actually came for a session for me, basically for me to heal her or help her with something. And at some point in that session, she started channeling my mom. And I was like, whoa, like, where did this come from? I was not expecting this. So, of course, naturally, her and I like really kicked off and became really good friends. As our friendship progressed throughout the months, like I realized that this person was dealing with a lot of their unresolved trauma. They had a lot of anger. They had a lot of like blaming of others for certain things that were happening to them when they were completely responsible for it. And I felt like I was getting dragged into it, and it was draining me. It was draining me. And I just remember at this point starting to hear, I was starting to really read Tantra and stuff like that. And I had heard months before I had met her that I had completed my soul purpose. So like I was done. I could do whatever I wanted. As I had this friendship with this girl, I'm like, or this woman, sorry, I'm like, okay, I keep hearing this is not your dharma. Like if you continue being part of this friendship, which is dragging you down, this is not part of your drama. This is not what you're supposed to be doing. And I remember sitting down and actually using the quantum heart technique. And I said, okay, what's the most important thing to me in my life right now? Like, what is driving me forward? And I came down to the conclusion of happiness. Happiness is what really makes me thrive when I'm at my peak. So is this relationship making me feel happy? And I said, no, this is causing me a lot of stress. And I remember coming from it, and it was very difficult for me because I was like, I tried to end it very nicely. And I was like, hey, like we're friends, I care about you, but I don't think this friendship like that is really helping me. So I think we need to kind of like split ways for a little while. She didn't take it really well. And I remember saying, okay, well, I'm not, I know what the guides have told me. I know what I feel. This until happiness can be re-brought into this situation, I won't step into that situation anymore. And I decided to be alone. I decided like, okay, because I don't have a lot of friends, like it's being a shaman, it's really hard to like have friends that are not at your level. You already know that. And like, I chose to stick to my dharma. I chose to stick to happiness, which was really funny because I had even stepped away from TikTok because TikTok with that whole cultural appropriation thing had gotten so intense where I was like, I don't want to be part of this negativity. I can't be part of this negativity. Finally, one day after being off of it for like a month and a half, I was told, you need to go on there because you know a lot about this and you need to set the table straight no matter what happens. And of course, I had fear. I had total fear. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to post this and people are going to chew me out. And of course it happened, right? But as soon as I did it, you showed up and you had seen the post and you're like, hey, and then you reached out and we became, friends. And it was not until probably last week where I was meditating. I was like, I think about formulas and I think about how things happen in reality. And I was like, what aligned me with Sahara? Because I really value our friendship. And I was like, how did I find someone like that that's at my level and like can really understand things and we see the world? I need more people like that in my life. And I remember you were looking for happiness. You chose that your dharma was going to focus on happiness, and you're always talking about joy. And I'm like, oh, duh, that was what did it right there. So in a way, like this is a manifestation for me come true because a year and a half ago, I actually wanted to be on a podcast with you, and I was like, oh my God, I want to be there. And I talked to my PR publicist, and he gave me some bogus answer, and I was like, you know what? If I can't do it through him, it's gonna happen somehow. It's just gonna happen somehow because I trust the universe. And it happened in a way that I would have never expected it to happen. You know what I mean? And like now I'm here and this is truly like one of my manifestations come true in a way that I didn't even expect it because now I have a really valuable friend out of it. You know what I mean? And it's like that's what the Dharma path is. That's what life is. And that's why, I could look back on that one friend and be like, oh, like she dragged me through so much crap. But really, without her and learning the lesson to like validate myself, I would never be here.
I love that
Mm.
story so much, of course, because I'm in it, but even outside of it, because we've all had situations that we've been in friendships that are not serving us. And then you're so used to being in the friendship that you're just like, oh, well, I care about this person. And then you're like, wait, is this like a friendship is a choice? It's not like your
Mhm.
family, like it's a choice. And if it's bringing you down, it's not like this person's just going through a rough patch. We've had so many good years together. It's like from the get go, this friendship is just bringing you down. So it's like, am I going to choose to be involved with this, or am I going to choose to even be alone, but wait out for friends who feel more at my vibrational frequency? And that's what you did. And with this podcast, I don't accept any pitches at all. Every single person who's on the podcast, I choose them. There is no pitching on this
Mm.
podcast. It's on my website, because I only have people who are teachers to me on this podcast, like people who I have learned from, who I'm like, oh my God, I've learned so much from you. I want to share you with other people. And that's what you have been to me. You have been such a beautiful teacher. This is like so corny now. We're like, we love each other so much, but it just goes to show that you stood in your power and you stood in
Mhm.
your heart. And that is why, this conversation is happening right now, because it's your manifestation and my manifestations brought together and bringing more joy to the planet. So yay, I love that. And
Yeah.
another thing I wanted to touch upon is one of your abilities is to help people tap into their abilities and their powers. So can you share a little bit more about that? And we were actually practicing, because my power is to bring people joy. And we
Mhm.
were practicing on your husband and on some people that I was like bringing joy to them. And it was like my ego almost couldn't believe it, because I was like, okay, they're just saying this to me to make me feel better. Like there's no way I'm actually, because I was like singing and dancing in my head and like passing it to them. But then when I would try it on different people, they had completely different experiences. So can you share, how can we tap into what our unique abilities are?
Oh, yeah, this is like my jam. So the one thing I always tell people is your imagination is key. Like your imagination is going to be one of those things that makes it or breaks it for you. If you believe that wholeheartedly you can change a person's life, you will find a way to do that, rather through a healing session or some other way. So I have this tendency of creating new abilities for myself, and this is exactly how I do it. If I want to be able to bend probability, and all of my friends have seen me do this, we'll be playing some sort of dice game, and I will call out what number the dice is going to end up on. And it happens all the time. I can say 7 14 times, and it's always going to land on 7, because I've learned how to manipulate probability. The only way I'm able to do that is because I know the dice are listening to me. I know that I can move the dice in a specific orientation if I really 100% believe about it. I tested this theory as well when I was playing, like I used to play Pokemon Go back in the day, and how everyone used to get together for those raids for the main monster. I would always there's when you play the game, there's like a 5%, like a 3 to 5% chance that you're gonna actually get like the mega monster that you're fighting, and I would always tell myself, I'm going to get this. Like, there's 50 people here, chances are it's going to be only 3 or 4 of us that are actually going to catch it. I'm going to be one of those 4. And I held it in my heart 100%. And every time it would happen, the moment I would have like a slight doubt, like, yeah, I'm going to crush this, I'm going to get it. Maybe you won't. Maybe you should be calmed down. That I would lose it. That would be it. That was it. So one of the things I really like to remind people is like, your psychic abilities, stop calling them psychic, first of all, because they're not supernatural, they're natural. One of the things I like to recoin is metaphysical naturalism. It is natural for you to be metaphysical. It is natural for you to be psychic. We're all born that way. There are cultures that have been described as like telepathic, and we've known about them. So one of the things that I really like to focus on is first opening up the imagination and then enacting it in reality, because a lot of times we only think about our psychic abilities being this thing that you can only do it when you're doing tarot, you can only do it when you're meditating or you're healing somebody, but really those are the same abilities that you can use in tarot, or you can use them in your everyday life. So you need to learn how to integrate your psychic abilities, or like the thing that you want to incorporate into your reality. Anything can become a psychic ability. If you want to become somebody who is always super lucky and you're always getting blessings just randomly happen to you all the time, you can be that person. The first thing that comes down to it is you being 100% in that power, then allowing your imagination to play it out, and then actually going out into the world and reminding yourself when you're walking down the street, I'm lucky, I'm lucky, I'm lucky. You'll notice that when you say that to yourself, you'll go to a like a smoothie shop or somewhere, and the guy's like, oops, I made an extra smoothie by mistake. You just want it? I won't charge you for it. I'm lucky. I'm lucky because I just got an extra smoothie and I can bring it back and I can give it to my husband. You know what I mean? Like, you can have that type of thought process because you are magical. There is nothing in reality that's stating that you cannot be all of the psychic abilities at once. It's more so what resonates with you, because I don't want to learn how to control someone's mind on purpose, right? To puppeteer them. That's not an interest of mine. But what I do love to do is talk to people's subconsciouses. And one of my abilities is being able to directly isolate like your consciousness, your subconscious, your spirit, your soul, and be able to talk to them, because I recognize that they're listening always. Like, they're always there. They just are waiting to be interacted with, right? So for like you had seen how I had taught you how to tap into joy, but it was really just you knowing what joy meant to you, and then knowing that you had the ability to give that to another person, and then using your imagination, however it came through when you were interacting with that individual, that then changed their lives. Like, that's really how superpowers come to be. And yeah, I help people tap into like there's like not only your psychic abilities but the healer abilities as well, and like other like side things as well that happen as a byproduct, because really everyone can be a healer, everyone can be a psychic, everyone can be an alchemist. Really, we all have a little bit of everything that comes back to like source consciousness. And one of the things that in Egyptian alchemy, even yogic alchemy, that you're really taught a lot about is like, how can you embody source? How can you remind yourself that you're that powerful even though you're having a human experience? And that's kind of like the secret to it all, is just like having that faith and having that determination. And some powers come to you differently. Some powers are based off of trust. Like, if you want to know how to read people authentically and always know the truth, you have to have a lot of trust. You need to trust that whatever's coming to you, when someone says, oh yeah, I had such a fun night last night, and you hear, no, they didn't. They argued with their boyfriend all night long. You have to have the trust to be able to say, okay, no, what I'm hearing is actually true. That's the truth. And then if you orchestrate the conversation to maybe spin it around and get them to talk about what actually happened last night, you'll realize that you were right. They'll be like, oh, my boyfriend didn't want to go to the party, and I went to the party still, but I was still stuck up because he was texting me all night long, and it was this thing. And you heard that originally. You had to have the trust to embody it. If you want to trust, not only is in a lot of abilities, but also determination and willpower. Like a lot of things, like people who want to become really abundant and want to bring out more money, you have to have the willpower to make that happen. And it's not just willpower to go after like the opportunity to get money. It's the willpower to say, you will accept nothing less but the manifestation that you've created. And that means that you will take whatever action is necessary for you to get to that place. And sometimes that means you meditate 3 hours a day. Sometimes that means like you just write all of your feelings down to absorb it. But you can always talk to your soul. You can ask it. Your higher self is a part of your soul that hasn't integrated fully into this reality for a purpose, so that it can remember everything that it's been able to do in other lifetimes. So if you sit down in a meditation and you say, I'm going to directly talk to my soul, I'm going to ask it what I should be focusing on to bring out my divine abilities, you'll get like a key word or sensation, and it'll tell you happiness or love or desire. You take that word and you start looking for that word everywhere in your reality, and you're going to start slowly seeing, okay, if your keyword was desire, what is your desire? Well, I desire to have an ice cream today, but I just don't have time to go do that. Oh, turns out your friend comes over to your job and he has an ice cream just ready. Oh, I was just thinking about you. I just brought an ice cream. Like, you had a desire. You had to be able to put that out into the cosmos. Another thing is like, what my friends think is really funny, but I use numerology and I speak to the universe. So I think of reality, and I teach people that reality is spiritual technology. This is a huge desktop and you're not even realizing it. So just like any other form of spiritual technology, any desire you have is essentially just an app on the computer. So if I want to have the experience of a lot of ecstatic love, it's an app that I just have to turn on, know that it's on, it's running. I'm not micromanaging it. I'm rolling with it, right? And it's going to play out some way, shape, or form in my reality if I just know that it's running in the background, right? And we forget how intimately easy it is to manipulate reality in that fashion, mostly because a lot of people probably haven't learned how to do that yet, or they don't fully trust that it can be that easy. We're taught that reality is so hard. And when coming back to one of the first things that I teach in Antai is time's a thought in your mind. If you think that like it's going to take you 20 years to become clairsentient, it's going to take you 20 years or maybe more. But if you're like, I'm clairsentient right now, time doesn't even affect me right now. Yeah, I'm clairsentient, I'm not experiencing it fully, but I know it's there. And you have that determination, that willpower, and that's essentially the willpower. Like I'm not experiencing it, but I know it's here. It's going to happen. Eventually, you'll start experiencing all the experiences that bring you into that particular ability that you want. But yeah, I think that's like the quickest way I can explain it to people.
I love that. And we'll dive more into it in the Rose Gold Goddess Circle, which I'm just so
Yeah.
excited about. And yeah, it's beautiful when we know how powerful we are, and that we do have the ability to create change in our lives, in the lives of others, in a positive way. And we doubt ourselves. I think that's the biggest thing. We doubt that, like, how can I make a difference? Or if it's not physical, it must not happen. Like, for
Mhm.
myself and joy, I was like, I don't know, like, I know how to bring joy if I'm talking to someone, if I'm dancing with someone, if I'm DJing for someone, but like, just to share the vibration of joy without even like seeing what they look like that, to me, I was like, I don't know if I can trust that. Like, my egoic mind couldn't believe it, right? Because we're
Mhm.
so in this, three-dimensional field. But it just comes with that practice and that trust and that feedback of like, it sounds weird, it sounds out there, but even a group of people meditating around the world will have a massive shift in the vibration and the timelines available for the planet, simply by people gathering together and meditating. And now,
Mhm.
finally, science is beginning to research this with Dr. Joe Dispenza and so many different people. So it's almost like we're finally beginning to understand the things that we believed in as a kid were actually real. Magic is real. It's
Yeah,
just, we get
totally.
to go
Yeah.
back and remember it now.
Yeah. And it's like a lot of my students sometimes they get kind of like really angry because when they realize, oh my God, like everything I was essentially taught through culture and reality is wrong, and like they almost feel like they got cheated from this whole experience of like reinvigorating their lives to like their imagination. Again, we're in 2021. That's what we're supposed to be doing right now. We're supposed to be reinvigorating that child and knowing that we're big kids right now. We have the resources to do whatever we want. We can make it happen. All we have to do is give ourselves the permission to be that person and trust that as we step forward into that body, we're going to have more experiences that make us feel concrete. Because there's there's many times in any individual's life where you're met with a choice to grow or to stay the same. And if you are afraid of the growth, which happens to us so naturally, you're going to stay the same. You're going to repeat the same process until one day you decide to have the courage to move forward. And when you have that courage, you'll see your life change, because it's a step-by-step process. One of the things about time that's most interesting to me is that like we're quantum shifting all the time. Right now, there's a version of us that's not even having this conversation. There's another version of us that's having this conversation on a totally different podcast. You know what I mean? And like that infinity concept is like from moment to moment, with every thought that you make, you're jumping a timeline. So what timeline do you want to be focused on? Do you want to be focused on one that really empowers you? Like one of the things I like to do when I was first like really trying to develop some of my higher abilities, I would wake up and I'd be like, I'm super psychic today. Like I'm even more psychic than I was last night. I boo, boo, boo. And I would have like all these different kind of like affirmations that made me feel like I was always getting stronger. I was always getting healthier every second of the day. And that eventually became my reality. And now I can sit down with a person and just talk to them for 5 minutes, and I guarantee you I can tell you everything that's going on in their life, because I allowed myself to embody the shaman. And each one of us is a shaman. Each one of us is a Buddha. Each one of us is a yogi. We're just waiting for the permission to actually tap into it by just saying, I am that. I am, and that comes down to the fundamental law of manifestation, because I am is essentially saying that you're using the voice of God or the voice of source. Like that is.
So
Mhm.
beautifully said. And I am is like Aum,
Mhm.
AUM, which is the sound of the universe. So
Mhm.
it's so beautiful how it all co-aligns, and how we can recognize that, and to really get rid of the imposter syndrome that says like you need to train for this long and this way and do this and do that, just to reclaim it and let your spirit be your teacher, because you know
Yeah.
your spirit will show you everything it is that you need to learn through your life's experiences and your thoughts and your beliefs and your obstacles. But most of us, we don't recognize that to be the school. We're like, that's the shit that I need to get rid of so I can like go to Hogwarts. But it's like, you're living in Hogwarts right now, you're
Mhm.
just not recognizing it.
Yeah, I realized it. Yeah, yep. It's one of those cool things. I've definitely struggled with that. Like I told you with the like most recently I've been channeling one of my Agori lifetimes, like really hardcore. And I had come to some sort of like defeatist mentality where I was like, I haven't been practicing this for long enough to know any of what I know. And then I heard this message come through. It's like, well, technically, since time doesn't exist, you're in the other timeline right now as that yogi doing all the work. And like because time doesn't exist, but you got reincarnated in this lifetime, you've already done all the work. That's why you're remembering everything so easily, and you just have to roll with it. You're picking up the practice that you left off. It's not like you have to start from zero all over again.
100%. I mean, so many of us, and if you're still listening to this podcast like 2 hours in, you are one of these people. Like, we've been doing this for many, many lifetimes. Like, this is not our first rodeo. We wouldn't even be able to understand this stuff had we not. So we get to piggyback off of all of the work that we've done in these other lifetimes. Like when I was writing Idiot's Guide to Ayurveda, which is a 400 plus page textbook on Ayurveda for educating the American population. So that's like a pretty, you got to be very on point. You got to be very scientific. You can't just make shit up. Like, you're explaining Ayurveda here, which is an age old science. But I would sometimes just look out the window and just my fingers would be typing. I'm just looking out the window, and all of this information that I've never learned in this lifetime was streaming through me. I'm talking about specific information, gunas, subgunas, how the koshas are connected to the chakras. This is not information that I can just make up, which then fact checkers are then fact checking and seeing, yes, this is actually like, these are things from old 5,000 plus year old ancient Sanskrit texts. How could I know this in this lifetime without reading that first? It's all our past life information that is streaming through us. It's just most of us, we don't trust it. We don't turn on the faucet. But once you turn on that faucet, it's like blah, 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 and we just doubt it so much because we're like, I must be making this up. I must be. But it's like, where does your imagination come from? Like, your imagination is also coming from somewhere. And
Mhm.
and I mean, you just see, like, I follow this little boy Brody on Instagram. He's like 3 years old, and he's like this amazing ballerina, and he just has such like emotion and passion as he dances, and you're just like, there is no way this 3-year-old just picked that up right now. Like, he
Mhm.
did not learn that from YouTube video. He's been a dancer for many, many lifetimes. And so it's up to us to tune into, what have I spent many, many lifetimes doing? What's my unfinished business that I have come back to complete? And then oftentimes you complete it, and then it shows you something new, and then another
Mhm.
past life turns on, and another one, and another one. And you're just like going through life, completing all these soul contracts. Then you reach this point, you fulfilled your dharma, and you're like, okay, now what is my heart desiring to create?
Mhm.
Because you're no longer living from past life karma anymore. You're just like in a clean slate, creating a new reality.
Yeah, I think that was one of the biggest lessons that I had to learn when I completed my dharma, because like when you're in your soul purpose, it's almost like you're in a mission. Like you gotta get this done right now. At least it was for me. And like when I was done, I almost felt lost. I was like, what am I supposed to
Yeah.
do now? Like that I don't have this. Like, what am I doing? And it always came down like, well, what do you want out of life now? Like, what is it that's most important to you? And it was
Mhm.
like, I just want to be happy, and I want everybody else to be happy. And that's at the end of the day, like regardless if you've attained your dharmic expression and you've evolved past it, it's never going to stop being a part of you. You know what I mean? Like you may have completed the sole purpose, but the thing that drove you, and I think that was one of the things that I learned, I had to like rediscover, was like when I was doing my soul purpose, like what drove me. And I almost had lost my why. And that's why I disappeared for a little while, because I had to refine that. And it's okay if you have to do that. Sometimes we like, especially with today's culture, we feel like we have to chug through it and keep going, even though you're drained of energy and you don't have what it takes to like really bring your best. it's sometimes really, it's part of your soul purpose to be like, okay, maybe it's time to meditate just for a quick second. And after I had to accomplish my dharma, I was like, okay, well, what drove me previously was the fact that I just wanted to help people. Like, I wanted people to stop suffering from the stuff that I was suffering from. And when I realized that, I was like, okay, well, now I'm going to help people stop creating all these hard rules for themselves when it comes to manifesting. And that reinvigorated like my passion. Even though it's in a different format, I'm still fulfilling a critical part of my personality, which is eternal.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yes. And even our dharmas, there's so many different layers to it that it could be you completed a layer that was external, but there are still internal layers of evolvement, vibrational frequencies that you're here to share that are outside of words, or different stages that require you to go inward to listen to that next thing that comes out. Like, who knows? Like, we may hit 40 and be like, yo, we're going to run for president. And like, we didn't know.
Mhm.
So it's that remaining open to which part of the journey am I on right now? Because we get so attached and create an identity around even living our dharma and what that looks like, of like,
Yeah.
I am a teacher, I am a whatever, and this is who I am, and I'm on a mission, I need to wake up as many people. But it's like, even like awaken as many people as possible. It's like, that's coming from the ego too.
Mhm.
That is coming from the ego, that sometimes the dharma is really to just embody a certain frequency that has nothing to do with what you're actually doing.
Yes, yo, I always tell people the world need consciousness is medicine, and the world's medicine is you. Like, you shift your consciousness, you're gonna notice everybody around you is eventually gonna pick up on it. And like, you are basically like sometimes just embodying a higher level of consciousness is the Dharma. Like, you didn't have the objective to come here and like save a bunch of people. And that's one of the things that I find a lot of healers struggle with this. They're like, oh my God, I don't feel like I'm fulfilling my soul purpose because I'm supposed to be saving all these people. Like, you can't save everybody. Like, some people don't want to be saved. You have to be aware of that. And some people are not ready to be saved at the moment that you come around, but somebody else can help them get saved. And at the end of the day, we all have to save ourselves, right? So it's like this really interesting thing that when you're growing through your soul purpose, you need to see how you're polarizing yourself. Because one of the main things that all alchemy teaches you, all spirituality, is like not to be dualistic or not to be polaric, even though those are things that you must use in this dimension. The positive and the negative to justify how you're going to live your life is not ultimately something that should be leading. It's a tool more so than a compass. Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this very idea of like, I am the savior, like, no, you're not. No one is the
Mhm.
savior. It's not your responsibility to save anyone. You cannot save anyone, because if someone is committed to drowning, they're going to drown, right?
Mhm.
It's not until we decide to swim that we're going to float and make it to whatever waters we're meant to make it to. And to even say that, well, I know the answer, I know the path. Like, I like even this languaging of like, I'm awake and we got to awaken the sheeple, like the sheep. And
Mhm.
it just creates more duality and divisiveness. And it's not what this true ascension and descension is all about. It's about
Mhm.
realizing that you really are here to be your highest expression, whatever that looks like. And that may create beautiful change in the world around you, but that's not the purpose of it. It's like
Mhm.
detaching. It's like a flower doesn't blossom to like affect the lives of people around it. Truthfully, it
Mhm.
doesn't. It blossoms
Mhm.
because that's its nature, and it's here to be beautiful. And it's so hard for us. It's like, I know I grew up as an activist. So it's like very, very hard, because we're like, well, we need to create change and we need to wake them up and we need to. And it's like, if that were meant to happen, it would happen. Right.
Mhm.
Just like we have gone on this path on our own somehow, every person at any moment can awaken to whatever level of consciousness they need to awaken to. We can share our light and shine our vibrancy and inspire people into action, but we cannot shake someone into awakening, because that actually creates more disruption and resistance, which
And
are the
resentment as
very
well.
things. Exactly. And then people are like, that's why people are like, screw the spiritual people. Like, they're like, up my ass trying to, or like people talk about the Christian people, the Jehovah's Witness, they're knocking door to door trying to tell me Jesus will save my life. How are we repeating that with just like spiritual languaging now by being like, oh, become a light worker, it will save your life? No, it won't. Nothing will save your life except you, and your life doesn't need to be saved. Like,
Saved, yeah.
who says everything isn't perfect just as it is?
Yeah. And like, I've talked to this, I've mentioned this before. Like sometimes infinity does not make sense. Sometimes infinity just is. You just gotta roll with it and it's like let it unfold. And sometimes, you may feel like you are supposed to be saved, but it's until the moment that you realize like there was nothing to be saved from, that you really find like this weird enlightenment that and just like the Buddha says, like there's so many times where a shaman will hit this peak where they're like, oh wow, I've been complicating my life for no reason, and all you can do is laugh. Like you just get this urge to laugh at yourself because life is a joke. Like you made it something more than what it was because you didn't know any better, and now you know. And look at that, like that was the greatest joke of the cosmos itself, is making you forget how powerful and how lucid you are. Because really, like every culture teaches us that we're living in a dream, and just like when you're lucid dreaming, you can control what happens to you. Like it comes down with like a little bit of practice, of course, and like expertise on like getting to know how your dreams work and how to wake yourself up and whatnot. But really at the end of the day, like this is, your life was meant to be experienced at its fullest. And if you don't like something that's happening in your reality, no one wants to ever hear it, but like how are you contributing to that one element being something that happens to you all the time, right? And like when you figure out what that is, you'll be able to change it like that. It'll be so fast. And then you'll realize, okay, like the problem that I was dealing with that I felt like I couldn't get out of really had the most simplistic answer. And when you kind of remember that, you can rinse and repeat that same methodology with everything that's going on with you. Some of the decisions are going to be extremely hard to make versus others, because of course, attachment is the root of all suffering. We might be attached to a specific person or situation, but ultimately, when we come down to being authentic with ourselves, knowing what our truth is, we can then find like this simplicity that is almost undescribable, really, I feel.
It's so true. And that's why for me, it just keeps coming back to joy and fun
Mm-hmm.
and laughter and
Mm-hmm.
play, which seem like the most like childish, primitive things, right? But it's, to me, it's the holiest. It is the most sacred because it's why we're all here. It's why we're fighting the fights. It's why we're, getting on the internet and having comment wars, is we just want to live in joy. And we just have different ways that we think other people are going to get there. And that's it. It's all
Mm-hmm.
just a misunderstanding, So it's like,
Yeah,
instead
yeah,
of trying to tell people what they got wrong and they need to know this, it's like, if someone is joyful, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter. Like some people, they may find joy in getting on stage and talking to millions of people and like being Tony Robbins, and like that's their highest form of joy. And for someone else, it may be meditating in a cave and having no human contact. How are we to say one person's
that's
path
right.
is superior than another?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. And sometimes one of the things that I've learned most recently is like sometimes you go for something and you think that's going to really make you happy, whether it's like fame or a ton of money or whatever it is that you're going after. And it takes a great deal of wisdom to look at what you've been chasing and asking yourself, is this truly what I want? Is this truly going to make me happy and bring me to the highest vibration? Not everyone can do that. And sometimes I've definitely been there. I've gone after things that I was like, oh yeah, this is the next thing that's going to make me feel the most fulfilled. And then I end up getting it. And I'm like, whoa, this is not what I wanted at all. And you have to be at the point of even questioning your own ideas, not because like you don't trust yourself, but you have to be real with yourself. And being real with yourself is checking in with yourself regularly, making sure that you're following that path. Sometimes you come off a little bit, but once you have that moment of realness with yourself, you'll step back into the vibration that you need to, and you'll make whatever needs to happen. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're so used to, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, like you go up this progression of like, what's next? Like what's bigger, what's better, what's going to get me the corner office, what's going to make me more money, what's going to get me more followers, what's going to get me more six figures, whatever the thing is. But maybe that's not actually what would bring you the highest form of joy. Like maybe you were meant to climb that ladder to level 6. And then you're like, no, I don't want to be on this ladder anymore. You don't need to go to level 10 if you don't like that ladder anymore. And I think we're
Mm-hmm.
so afraid of like Well, I worked so hard on this thing and I don't want to lose track. Like I remember hearing this story of my friend's uncle, and he was a lawyer for 50 years, finally retired. And she was like, what do you think is the secret to such a successful career? You know, you've been a lawyer for so long. Most people, change their jobs so many times. He's like, when I was in law school, I realized I didn't want to be a lawyer. I realized I didn't even like this career. And I told my parents, and they said, but you already went to law school. You can't quit now. So I actually spent 50 years of my life hating my career. And I could have lost those 4 years I went to law school, but instead I lost 50 years. So here we are thinking that this person has the highest form of success, a long career. They made millions of dollars over their life, but because they weren't, or because they listened to other people's fear saying you can't lose 4 years, they lost a lifetime. So it's, if
Yes.
someone's listening to this and you're like, but I've worked this job for so long, I'm about to get a promotion, or I'm about to hit this. It's like, like for me, like I've written books and stuff. I'm like, right now, honestly, my highest form of joy of what I want is to bring dance and music to the world. The next logical thing for me to do is just keep writing a book and another book, just keep going. I'm like, no, like I really feel like my highest form of joy is through music and dance. And that's how I can share it with more people. So someone could be like, wait, what? You've written multiple books and now you want to like be an actual DJ? And I'm like, yes, because I know for me, that's what my highest form of joy at this stage looks like.
Mhm. Yeah, and one of the things that most people don't realize is like usually when you pursue like the joy or the happiness, the thing that really drives you, all that other stuff that you were asking for is automatically going to come with it. Like because you feel at your highest vibration. So if one of your things was like money and fame or whatever, and you're feeling the best that you can feel, like those things are going to naturally magnetize themselves to you because there is nothing left over. There's no resistance other than fulfilling happiness, and that's part of the equation, right? So yeah, I have tons of stories like that, like your friend's uncle, and like I've had clients because I work with a lot of LGBT people. So like I have clients that come to me and they're like in their 80s or their 90s, and they have lived this whole second life where they had a wife, they had kids, like their kids don't talk to them anymore, their wife has passed away. They've been in the closet this whole entire time, and now they're 80 and they want to explore that, but they can't because the times have changed and they don't know the culture and they don't know all this other stuff. And maybe people don't find them attractive for some reason. And that's probably one of the worst, like those are probably the most difficult people to work with, because you can't help but to feel like their pain and be like, man, like you just realize that you threw away what you truly wanted to be experiencing, and no one should ever be there. So like I really do enjoy oftentimes like working with those clients because it reminds me like, what are you doing right now, Axel? Like where are you not fulfilling yourself in that way? And just always remember, like it's now or never. Tomorrow you might die worrying about the fears that are happening today, and you don't want to be in the astral looking back and be like, man, I could have done it if I would have just had a little bit more courage, because that's always going to be the thing that brings you back into reincarnation. Some people want to be reincarnated, some people don't. I know definitely when I'm done with this one, I'm out. So yeah.
Love that so much. Well, we have traversed so many different pathways and rabbit holes today, and we're so excited for your Rose Gold Goddess workshop this
Yeah, thank
October.
you.
So where can listeners connect with you and learn more from you?
Yeah, so I have a YouTube page, which is Onto High Quantum Healing. You can find a lot of like the wisdom and the magic that I teach on there, free energy classes. Obviously, follow me on Instagram at Onto High. And I also have a Patreon where I do classes every week with like students, anything from like channeling to energy work, stuff like that. So all those places are really good to get a hold of me, to connect with me, to do one-on-one coaching and whatnot. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today. I
Thank
really loved the
you.
conversation.
Yeah, I loved it too. Thanks for being part of my life.
Likewise.